Hey everyone, whenever I'm building a brand new computer, I usually end up looking at the X3D gaming CPUs because everyone often puts them on a pedestal, but then I see the prices and I think, oh, I can't really afford that, and then I end up buying a slightly cheaper CPU. And that's what I did earlier this year when I built this particular computer, because I ended up buying the Ryzen 7700 CPU. I bought this from AliExpress for a really cheap price, and actually it's worked out brilliantly for me. So really, is there any need to upgrade to an X3D CPU? That's what I wanted to discuss in this video, because I recently got my hands on the 7800 X3D, and on paper, these two CPUs are quite similar. They've both got 8 cores, they've both got fairly good base core clock speed, and they've both got fairly good turbo clock speeds. So was I wrong to put the X3D CPUs on a bit of a pedestal? Well, that's what I wanted to answer in this video. And after lots and lots of testing, I can say 4 to 15%. And that is the performance difference between the Ryzen 7700 CPU and the Ryzen 7800 X3D CPU, depending on what resolutions you play at and what games you play and everything else. Now, before I go into those gaming results, I should say that this video is sponsored by AliExpress, which I'm really grateful for because you can actually get a really good discount when shopping with them. And actually, I've been a personal customer of theirs for many years. I've never had any issues whatsoever, so I'm really excited they have sponsored this video. More on that later, but for now, I wanted to dive into Cyberpunk. And for all of these tests, I used the same hardware that you can see on the screen now, only the CPU has ever changed. And using the Ray Tracing Overdrive preset of 4K with native rendering, both systems struggled as expected, but the X3D chip was ahead, unlike when I enabled DLSS 4 for some reason, because then that system was actually behind. I did rerun this test multiple times, and this was the result, but it was more of a one-off, because when stepping down to 1440p, the X3D CPU pulls ahead again. Yes, it isn't a massive difference, but the 1% lows kind of are. I mean, it's a 10 to 15% difference, and that does make a massive difference to how smooth the game feels, and I'll come back to that point later. Enabling DLSS continues to see the X3D chip win. Again, it's not a massive difference, 1 or 2 FPS, but then when you work out the percentage difference, it does seem a bit better. And also, you've got to realize that the Ryzen 7700 is a very good bang for your buck CPU. When abandoning ray tracing and running with the Ultra preset, the X3D chip is again ahead, but not massively so. And I should point out at this stage that I'm going to cover 6 games in total, but I won't be doing, dozens of graphical comparisons for each of them, don't worry. I just wanted to set the stage with Cyberpunk because it's, well, Cyberpunk. But when enabling DLSS, we start to see more of a difference again, and I should also point out the power draw figures at the top right. Eagle-eyed viewers may have already seen this, but the Ryzen 7700 CPU is actually consuming more power throughout. And I'll come back to this point later, because when we stop down to 1440p, we do see much more difference here, especially with the 1% lows that then deliver a much more smoother gaming experience. Yeah, apparently I accidentally shot someone. Whoops. But enabling DLSS 4 does lead to quite a solid win for the X3D chip here, in both the average and the 1% low figures. Now, some of those results might be a bit disappointing, and when I was first testing out the 7800 X3D, I went into Cyberpunk because that's the game I'm currently playing through, and I compared all the results to my 7700, and yeah, I was at first a little bit disappointed because there didn't seem to be that much difference. But then when you back up a little bit, you'll see that the 7800 X3D was running slower and using less power than the Ryzen 7700. In other words, this CPU, the older one, was actually having to work harder to get sort of the same level of frame rates as the 7800 X3D. And I'm going to talk about that point more throughout this video, but next I wanted to go to Hogwarts Legacy. And here we see a more immediate difference. I'm sticking to the medium preset without any ray tracing just to keep things a bit more simple, and the X3D chip does do much better here, especially at smoothness when looking at the 1% and the 0.1% lows. Enabling DLSS results in a noticeably higher average FPS number, and you can also see the GPU is more in use on the X3D system, and I think that's because that X3D CPU is more powerful, which allows the GPU to be a little bit less bottlenecked, which we then see reflected in all 3 of those FPS figures. Stepping down to 1440p highlights the differences between these two CPUs even more, with even higher numbers across the board. And we can also see this when enabling DLSS, although if anything the numbers here are a bit worse, probably due to Hogwarts being a bit of an unoptimized mess, to be honest. You can often enable a more efficient setting like DLSS or the low preset, and then end up getting a lower FPS rate, which is incredibly annoying from a benchmarking perspective. But either way, the X3D chip does show its strength here in Hogwarts Legacy. So there's a more clear difference there, which is kind of a relief because at first when I was playing Cyberpunk, not seeing that much difference, I was getting a bit concerned. But thankfully Hogwarts Legacy did show that difference, especially at 1440p. And since we play in unoptimized games, we're going to carry on that trend by playing Marvel Rivals. But first, do you like money and saving money? For a short time only, AliExpress is running a cashback challenge, and you can now sign up for the Tech Override team and earn cashback on all your AliExpress purchases. The more you buy, the more you save, sort of. All you have to do is scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the description. And while you're at it, you can use the coupon code shown on screen now to get further discounts. Simply enter the code into the promo code section of the checkout page. Thanks again to AliExpress for sponsoring this video. At 4K with settings on high, we're seeing a similar average FPS number, but with a better 1% lows from the X3D chip, while consuming 30 watts less power, so a third or more reduction for similar or better performance, which seems great to me. Enabling DLSS does then see a higher average FPS rate, although for some reason the X3D chip was then achieving lower 1% rates. I did rerun all these tests multiple times, and this was just the result at 4K with DLSS on for some reason. More difference was seen when stepping down to 1440p resolution though, and this was with native rendering, again with the high preset and no ray tracing or anything like that. You can see there's a fairly sizable difference. And then when we enable DLSS, we see the frame rates jump up a lot with the X3D chip. And here you can start to see the CPU actually be a bottleneck with the Ryzen 7700 system on the left. Often the CPU is 60% or more in use, with the GPU being below 90% in use. Sometimes not always though, granted. Whereas with the X3D chip, that ratio between the CPU and the GPU usage looks a lot healthier, delivering higher frame rates. And actually, if you are playing like online multiplayer games, then you are more likely to be playing at like 1080p or 1440p. But that was Marvel Rivals. Next, I wanted to look at Space Marines 2. I bought this game in the Steam Autumn sale, but haven't played through it yet, sorry, so I'm just aimlessly walking around the intro bit. But at 4K with an Ultra preset, I was seeing the same sort of performance, but enabling DLSS quality did see a rare win for the Ryzen 7700. Again, I run these tests multiple times and it was close, but the X3D chip just lost out on average with these particular settings and the resolution. However, stepping down to 1440p did see the X3D chip pull ahead fairly comfortably. It's nothing world-beating, but still a solid result, and for a fair bit less power usage too. Enabling DLSS then saw a similar pattern to Marvel Rivals, with the Ryzen 7700 seeming to get CPU bottlenecked at 1440p. The CPU usage is higher, and the GPU usage is less than 80%. The X3D CPU though didn't have that problem, delivering higher FPS rates as a result. Next up, another game for my backlog, hence the benchmark run. This is Red Dead Redemption 2, and with high to ultra settings across the board, at 4K we've seen the X3D chip pull ahead. Enabling DLSS saw similar average FPS rates, but the 1% lows were decently ahead, and for a third less power usage overall. Dropping down to 1440p did see a decent jump in FPS rates, with the X3D chip still delivering improvements in both the average FPS rates and the 1% lows. And it was more of the same when turning DLSS back on, with a decent improvement in FPS rates, despite the CPU and the GPU usages actually being fairly similar here. So again, better across the board, but if you only look at the average FPS number, you might be left a tiny bit disappointed, but when you then look at the 1% lows, things do look better, and that is very important for general gaming smoothness and things like that. And that segues us nicely to our next game, which is Total War Warhammer 3. Skulls for the Skull Throne! Kidding, actually I'm more of a Tau fan myself. Bennu at 4K, mainly with ultra settings, the X3D CPU was ahead, although not massively so. Switching to 1440p and not using DLSS since the game doesn't support that, we see more of a jump up in performance with higher FPS rates across the board and with decently less power draw as well. I could definitely see why RTS fans tend to opt for X3D chips due to the increased CPU demand from the game. The extra L3 cache does make a big difference here. So that wraps up most of my testing. I did also test out Steel Nomad, which shown a bit of a difference, but overall for gaming, should you go with, a cheaper Ryzen 7700 CPU or something like the Ryzen 7800 X3D? Well, the answer is, it depends, which I know is everyone's most hated answer, but actually that seems to be the best answer, to be honest, because if you're gaming at 4K, you're not going to notice things as much. I mean, the Ryzen 7700 is going to have to work harder to sort of deliver a more stable frame rate that is comparable to the 7800 X3D, but actually that's with a RTX 5070 Ti graphics card. If I was to upgrade that graphics card to something more powerful, I think then we'd see, more of a performance disparity between these two CPUs. While we often tend to focus on the average FPS rates, and there was like only a 4% gain with the 7800 X3D, when you look at the all-important 1% lows, then the 7800 X3D was miles ahead of the 7700, and then when you drop down to 1440p, you're again seeing double-digit gains. So again, it just comes back to what games you want to play and everything else. Thanks again to AliExpress for sponsoring this video and also giving discount codes to all of you. I really do appreciate that. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've got any questions or suggestions, please do leave a comment, and if you enjoyed this video, please click the thumbs up button, and please subscribe to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching.